Welcome to Crime and Court. My name is Heather, and we are going to be continuing along with our reading of the Franks Memorandum. And this is the report from the Richard Allen's attorneys in the Delphi case regarding requesting a Franks hearing. That's the type of hearing, that's the name of the hearing that they're looking to get from the court in this document. However, it was denied eventually, but that's by a judge that could very well be very biased. She threw the attorneys off the case, so we don't know. She did say in an official court document that she would grant a Franks hearing to the new attorneys, though, if they had wanted to pursue one, and they did. So it's interesting that she's not going to want to give Richard Allen's previous, now reinstated attorneys Franks hearing. But anyway, so we're continuing on. This is the conclusion. This is part 8 of my readings, and we're on the conclusion of part 2 of the Franks Memorandum. So let's start from there. Part 2 was dense with information. However, the court should be able to see that Tony Liggett knew about the obvious connection between Odinism and the Un-Alivings, and specifically the connection to Brad Holder, Patrick Westfall, Johnny Messer, Elvis Fields, and Rod Abrams. We were talking about them in the last couple episodes, because a big portion of this memo is about the the defense is coming with the strategy that these individuals are likely the perpetrators of the Un-Alivings rather than Richard Allen. So it's like a third party guilt. They're putting the guilt on someone else. So those are the individuals that we've talked about in length already. All right, so the fact that a mystery Purdue professor purportedly led the Unified Command off the scent of Odinites is preposterous. Additionally, according to Todd Click's affidavit, the FBI cold case unit determined that Odinites were involved in the Un-Alivings, but Unified Command did nothing to investigate that line of questioning, that angle. They never questioned or investigated the Odinite angle, and in my opinion, they sat on any information that came to them that was leaning towards any kind of Odinistic, ritualistic sacrifices or whatever it might be. It seemed ritualistic in nature, according to the FBI. So Unified Command seemingly rebuffed the Rushville investigators, Ferenczi, Murphy, and Click, who believed, based upon a large collection of evidence, that Holder, Westfall, Fields, Messer, and Abrams were all involved. Liggett's concealment of this Odinite information from Judge Diener was intentional or reckless at both. And remember, Judge Diener signed the warrant to arrest, to search Richard Allen, and that what they're saying here is that warrant should never have been signed by Judge Diener because all of this Odinite information has been left off either purposely or negligently, or maybe a little bit of both there. So, all right, part 3. Liggett concealed and falsified evidence in his affidavit for search warrant. The concealed and falsified evidence blows Liggett's timeline apart, which explains why he concealed and falsified information. So he, in order to fit his timeline, it seems like he's only allowing certain things to be told to Judge Diener to get his search warrant. All right, so for Liggett's timeline to work and to place Richard Allen on the Monon High Bridge at 2:13, the time of the famous Down the Hill video, Liggett desperately needed Betsy Blair to describe a man on the Monon High Bridge that looked like Richard Allen, and perhaps more importantly, needed Betsy Blair to describe a car that she observed parked at the CPS parking lot at approximately 2:15. as looking like Richard Allen's black Ford Focus. Betsy Blair's description of the man she observed on the Monon High Bridge around 2 p.m. looked nothing like Richard Allen. Liggett concealed this information from Judge Diener. Betsy Blair's description of the vehicle she observed at the CPS parking lot also looked nothing like Richard Allen's car, nothing like a black Ford Focus. So Liggett also concealed this information from Judge Diener. For good measure, Liggett also lied about what Sarah Carbow observed at 3:57 that also blew up his timeline. That was the description that looked like Elvis Fields standing by the mailboxes, and when he saw that she saw her, he looked startled, and then when she looked back, he was gone, and there was, like, he had to have ducked to be hiding from her because he didn't want to be seen, is what she assumed in that interaction there. So Betsy Blair's first description of the man she saw on the bridge was memorialized in sketch number 2, illustrated on February 17th, 2017, 3 days after the girls were found, but not released to the public until April 22nd, 2019, following Superintendent Doug Carter's press release. On February 17th, 2017, Betsy Blair met with State Police sketch artist Taylor D. Bryant and provided a description of the man she observed from 50 feet away from the Monon High Bridge, the same man that Liggett claimed in his affidavit was the Unaliver. Betsy Blair told the sketch artist that the man she observed was a white male, age 20, had brown curly hair, medium build. Find attached and marked as Exhibit 103, the unredacted facial identification reference sheet filed as confidential that contains the description that Betsy Blair provided to the sketch artist. Also, find attached a copy of the sketch that Taylor D. Bryant produced from Betsy Blair's description of the man she observed on the bridge, marked as Exhibit 104. This illustration is also called Sketch 2 because it was released to the public second. Upon looking at the sketch, Betsy Blair told the sketch artist that the illustration was a 10 out of 10 accuracy. And I forgot to pull my PDF up of what the sketches were. So I'm going to find that here while I'm trying to get through this. It's my computer's so slow when I'm streaming. It's slow anyways, but it's slow when I'm streaming. All right, so Unified Command did not release the Betsy Blair sketch to the public for over 2 years. Instead, they first released the Sarah Carbow sketch, also called Sketch 1, because it was released first to the public. So just for reference, I want to make sure that I have it up here so we can look at the time, which is what they're talking about when they say Sketch 1 and Sketch 2. Sorry, I apologize for not having it up first. Or ready to go. Here we go. It's opening. All right, so instead they first released, is it opening? It's not. I double clicked on it. Oh, there it is. Okay. Wow, that's very slow. All right, so this was the presentation that I put together back for part 4 of this reading, and it's a good reference tool for how the runes were looking, what the crime scene looked like, what the runes looked like on each of the girls. And this is the sketches. So Sketch 1, because it was released first, was this one in July 2017. That's Sketch 1. This is Sketch 2, which is the resemblance, remember, of Elvis Fields. And that was in April 2019. And then obviously we have Richard Allen, who was arrested October 2022, who looks nothing like either of the sketches. All right, so with those fresh in our minds now that we've refreshed them, we can continue. The Unified Command did not release the Betsy Blair sketch to the public for over 2 years. Instead, they first released the Sarah Carbow sketch, also called Sketch 1, because it was released to the public first. The Sarah Carbow sketch was illustrated by FBI sketch artist Plants from Detroit on June 19th, 2017. So that they released it, I guess, July 2017. It was released July 2017. Perfect. That's when it that's what I just said. All right. Oh, here we missed this. Blair's 10 out of 10 comment is memorialized in a report identified as the incident number ending in 03. This 10 out of 10 wording can be found in the second full paragraph. Find attached the unredacted copy. Okay. And what we were just doing, oh, they did a screenshot from a news source for Sketch 1 in their exhibits. That's what the footnote was. All right, so who was the person that Sarah Carbow was describing in her sketch? According to Liggett's affidavit, at approximately 3:57, Sarah Carbow observed a man walking westbound on County Road 300 North. Sarah Carbow was headed eastbound on County Road 300 North, operating her motor vehicle while simultaneously observing this man walking on the road toward her on the opposite side of the road. So she had a good view of him the whole time she was, coming closer to him. So this is the same man that Sarah Carbow described for the sketch artist on June 19th. So the guy that was muddy and bloody, or whatever the lies were in the description, the way that he was described. He was supposed to be like muddy and wet was her description. I think we get into it here, but I don't know if we've talked about it yet, but instead Liggett put in his description it was muddy and bloody, or in the probable cause affidavit, so making it a totally different description. I don't know. It just makes you think, like, the investigation, there's too many cover-ups or too many incidents that lead you to believe that there is reasonable doubt that it is not Richard Allen. All right, so roughly 2 years later, in March 2019, Betsy Blair met with Tony Liggett, frustrated that her sketch, which was sketch number 2, the curly-haired guy, she was angry that it had not been released, or frustrated that it had not been released to the public yet. So Betsy was frustrated because sketch number 1, which had been released to the public almost 2 years before, did not match the man that she saw observed on the High Bridge. Betsy even commented that sketch number 1 was wrong. So where was that? She said in an interview with Tony Liggett, she flat out told him that it was wrong. She said, number 1 with the golf hat is wrong. Certainly, it was odd that Sarah Carbow's sketch was chosen to be released over the Betsy Blair sketch for the following reasons. Betsy Blair provided her description to the sketch artist only 4 days after seeing the man on the bridge, while it was fresh in her mind, compared with Sarah Carbow, who provided her description to the sketch artist 126 days after Carbow observed the man on the road. Betsy Blair had a good look at the man's face while stationary from only 50 feet away. So remember, she saw him on that she was driving, her husband was driving a truck, and so she was raised up high and she was pretty level with his face, And she saw his face as they drove past the mailbox, and he looked very surprised to see her. So Sarah Carbaugh was not even stationary, but rather traveling down the road, operating the vehicle while simultaneously trying to observe the man on the road. So she's doing two things at once. So how fresh can her, or how good can her observations have been when she's trying to focus on two things at once? During her March 7th, 2017 interview, Betsy Blair was talking with two members of Unified Command, Kevin Hammond and Tony Liggett. In this interview, Betsy Blair told Liggett face-to-face that the man she observed on High Bridge fit the following description: that the man was slender and youthful looking. He was more boyish looking. The man was in his 20s to early 30s. He had his hair seemed poofy, just as the sketch portrayed, so the kind of fluffy, curly, poofy hair. And he had no facial hair that she can remember. Looks kind of like the description. Oh, sorry, you can't see. Just realized you can't see. I'm slow, guys. Give me a break. All right, so it clearly looks very different. And this is the poofy curly hair here in the middle photo. And this is the sketch that was done later. So, yeah, we're trying to figure out the order of the sketches here. Let me move this back now. All right, there we go. Sorry about that. All right, so now they're fresh in our minds. Finally, on April 22nd, 2019, Unified Command released Betsy Blair's sketch number 2 to the general public. In fact, upon its release, Superintendent Doug Carter commented that the man in Blair's sketch number 2 was, quote, responsible for the Un-Alivings, end quote. And that was in a press conference when they unveiled the sketch to the public. So they are pinning it on the curly-haired guy in the sketch. So curly-haired guy. All right. Oops, what did I just do? Okay. All right, so also at the time of the release of sketch number 2, Doug Carter also stated that sketch number 1 had become secondary to the investigation. Secondary. That's interesting. All right, so on March 7th, 2019, Liggett was present when Betsy Blair described the man she observed on the bridge. Betsy was actually talking to Liggett face-to-face when she provided the description. So let's see what that says. Oh, here. The fact that Sarah Carbaugh's sketch number 1 had become secondary to the investigation is confusing, considering Liggett's and Holman's claim that sketch number 1 and sketch number 2 are the same person. Yes, at some point in time, they told us it was the same person, which clearly they do not look the same. But then they come back out and say number 2 is actually the one that is the suspect, and number 1 is secondary to the investigation. So it's just interesting. And then the last footnote was coming from Betsy Blair's interview. So Liggett heard Betsy's description of a man of a much younger man with brown, poofy hair, but chose to conceal his information from Judge Diener. Blair, so it was not, sorry, I got an itch. It was not provided, obviously, for the purposes of the search warrant. Blair's description and arrest warrant. Blair's description of a youthful, boyish-looking person in his 20s, maybe early 30s, with brown, poofy hair, obviously does not describe Richard Allen. Find attached just transcript of Richard when Kathy was asked at length. Richard's hair would have been in. Am I on the right footnote? Hold on. I don't think so. 54. Find attached video interview of Richard Allen. So this is proof of what he looks like. And he doesn't match the images of the sketches. So in order for Liggett to have proved or provided Judge Diener with honest and accurate information, he would have had to state the following in his affidavit. I, Tony Liggett, believe that Richard Allen is the man that unalived the girls for reasons stated herein. I also believe that the man that Betsy Blair observed on the bridge is Richard Allen, therefore is the unaliver. However, I must also inform the court that the man that Betsy Blair observed on the bridge really looks nothing like Richard Allen, whereas Richard Allen was a man in his mid-40s with short or even shaved grayish hair. And that's where this comes in. So a transcript of the statement of Richard Allen's wife, Kathy, she says when she was asked what length Richard's hair would have been in 2017, she said Richard always had short hair. In fact, when asked for further description of how her husband has always worn his hair, Kathy said he shaved it, explaining that he had always shaved his hair since the National Guard. So clearly it wasn't poofy hair. The man that Betsy Blair described was youthful, boyish looking, and had brown, poofy hair. Also, Your Honor, Betsy Blair told the sketch artist that the man she saw on the bridge was just 20 years old. This description came only 4 days after she observed the man on the bridge. 2 years later, Betsy Blair still maintains that the man was in his 20s or even early 30s. Also, Betsy Blair told the sketch artist back in 2017 that the resemblance of the boyish sketch to the man that she observed on the bridge was a 10 out of 10. So, but I must also tell you, Judge, that this 10 out of 10 sketch looks absolutely nothing like Richard Allen. So that's basically what Liggett, this is kind of Allen's attorneys being snarky, saying that Tony Liggett would have had to have said this or sworn to this in an affidavit, basically, in order to be truthful. But he was not. All right, so Liggett had a legal obligation to inform Judge Diener of the vast differences between Betsy Blair's description of the man she observed on the bridge and Richard Allen. He did not. So the fact that this fact alone should be sufficient to merit tossing the warrant and suppressing the fruits of an illegal search. However, there is more. So if that's not enough, let's dive into even more. In order for Liggett's timeline to work, he needs Richard Allen's black Ford Focus to be parked at the CPS lot from 1:30 p.m. until 4:30 p.m. Betsy Blair sees one car at the CPS lot at 2:15 p.m. and it is not Richard Allen's car. Richard Allen voluntarily was interviewed on, my brain is slow, guys. Richard Allen voluntarily was interviewed on October 13th, 2023. Watching the videotaped interview, it is apparent that Richard thought he was being asked questions to help assist the police in solving the crime. Find attached Richard Allen's October 13th interview. Richard Allen does not realize that he is being interrogated as a suspect until much later in the interview. So that's not right. In trying to provide Liggett and Mullen a timeline of when Richard Allen, was on the trail, Richard stated he arrived at the trail around noon. In the exhibit 110, Richard tells Liggett and prosecutor investigator Mullins from the prosecutor's office that he had arrived around noon at this 10-hour mark. 10-hour mark, or 10 o'clock mark. 10 o'clock and 57 minutes. All right. Later in the interview, Richard Allen told Liggett and Mullen that he probably left the trail around 1:30. In his affidavit, so he was only there for an hour and a half. He was on his lunch break, I believe, or maybe he was done for the day. I'm not sure, but if he was on his lunch, like, why wouldn't he go back? And why wouldn't they check his when he clocked in, or what, check with his coworkers and see if he went back to the back to work at the CVS. All right, so in his affidavit, Liggett states that Richard Allen parked his black Ford Focus at the CPS parking lot, which was across the street from the trail, where you can get onto the trail, and then cut over to the trail, where he then walked to the high bridge, ultimately following Abby and Libby across the bridge before abducting them. Okay, but that's Liggett's assumption or inference, just because Richard Allen was there at the time that he did it. I don't know. After unaliving the girls, Liggett stated in his affidavit that Betsy Carbow observed a man that Liggett claims is Richard Allen walking along 300 North at approximately 3:57 p.m. westbound towards the CPS parking lot. The implication being that Richard Allen was walking back to his car after abducting and unaliving the girls. So those are all from affidavits there. If what Liggett wrote in his affidavit were true, then Richard Allen's black Ford Focus would have been parked in the CPS lot from 1:30 p.m. until at least 4 p.m., giving him time to abduct the girls and them and walk back to the Ford Focus parked at the CPS parking lot sometime after 3:57, when Sarah Carbow observed him walking down the road. In other words, for Liggett's timeline to work, Richard Allen's black Ford Focus would have had to remain parked in the old CPS building from roughly 1:30 p.m. when Liggett claims Richard Allen arrived until roughly 4 p.m. after, as Liggett claims, Richard Allen had abducted and unalived the girls. So if Richard Allen's black Ford Focus was not on that CPS parking lot between those hours, 1:30 and 4 p.m., then Liggett's timeline would be blown. In his deposition, Liggett was asked a series of questions by defense counsel, and Liggett answered those questions as follows. Is it your contention that Richard Allen's black Ford Focus was parked at the old CPS building at 1:29 roughly p.m. on February 13th, 2017? Yes. Is it your contention that Richard Allen's black Ford Focus was parked at the old CPS at 1:45 p.m.? Yes. Same question, 2 p.m. Yes. Same question, 2:14 p.m. Yes. 2:15, yes. 2:30, yes. 2:45, yes. 3 o'clock, yes. 3:15, yes. 3:30, yes. 3:45, yes. 4 o'clock, yes. 4:30, yes. What time do you contend that Richard Allen's black Ford Focus was no longer parked at the old CPS building? He says around 4 p.m. Oh, so he said no, sorry, at 4:30. So he said he left at 4. Or around 4. So through his answers, Liggett demonstrated that he recognized that for his timeline to work, Richard Allen's black Ford Focus would have to be parked at the CPS lot from 1:30 p.m. to 4 p.m. in order to give Richard the time to abduct and unalive the girls and return his vehicle. Therefore, if there was any evidence that Richard Allen's black Ford Focus was not parked in the old CPS parking lot between those times, that is something that he, Liggett, would be required to share with Judge Diener. Rather than tell the truth, Liggett concealed the evidence that Richard's black Ford Focus had left the CPS parking lot probably at 1:30 p.m. but certainly before 2:15 p.m. when Blair saw a completely different car, and therefore Richard Allen could not have been on the bridge at 2 p.m. or committed the Un-Alivings soon thereafter, and it was not him who Betsy Blair saw walking on the bridge. So for starters, or on the 300 North, sorry, not the bridge. So for starters, as noted earlier, in his interview with Liggett and Mullen, Richard Allen stated that Richard Allen, arrived at the trails around noon and left around 1:30 p.m. Liggett failed to inform Judge Diener that Richard Allen stated he had left the trails at 1:30. So he's leaving out key information to get a search and arrest warrant. He should have, especially if there were evidence that a different vehicle was parked at the old CPS lot after 1:30, but before 4 p.m., which would then support that Richard Allen's statement that he, Richard Allen, left the CPS building around 1:30. So the next question to ask is, did anyone see a vehicle parked at the old CPS building between 1:30 and 4 p.m. and did not resemble Richard Allen's black Ford Focus, thus supporting the timeline that Richard Allen provided to Liggett, but which Liggett concealed from Judge Diener? The answer is yes, Betsy Blair. When Betsy Blair arrived at the trail at roughly 1:46 p.m., Betsy Blair had parked her vehicle in a different location that the defense calls the Mears parking lot. When she left the Monon Trail and pulled out of the Mears parking lot, Betsy Blair headed west on 300 North in her car and was spotted on the Hoosier Harvest Store camera, heading towards the old CPS lot at 2:14 p.m. The old CPS lot is only a 36-second drive from the Hoosier Harvest Store camera. And that comes from an affidavit from a member of Richard's defense team, Matt Hoffman, who paced the distance from the Hoosier Harvest Store to the old CPS parking lot. It takes approximately 36 seconds, sorry. So giving Betsy Blair a full minute to drive from the Hoosier Harvest Store to the old CPS lot would mean that Betsy Blair would pass the old CPS lot at around 2:15. Remember that Liggett has admitted under oath that at 2:15 Richard Allen's black Ford Focus would be parked at the CPS building while he, Richard Allen, was abducting and ending the girls. However, at 2:15 p.m., when Betsy Blair passed the old CPS building, Betsy Blair did not see a black Ford Focus parked at the CPS lot. The car that Betsy Blair observed as she passed the old CPS building at 2:15 p.m. looked nothing like a black Ford Focus. According to Liggett's own report, Betsy Blair observed one car parked in the CPS lot at 2:15, and that car resembled a 1965 Ford Comet. I don't know what a Ford Comet is, but I know 1965 cars do not look like cars from today or Ford Focuses. So that I do know. She says her father once owned one. So Betsy Blair, I guess, in a depot or something. Our defense counsel recognized that in 1965, Ford did not make a Comet, Mercury did. But these were the words of Betsy Blair, who knew what the Comet looked like, but erroneously thought the Ford produced the Comet. So it is a Mercury. All right, so the shape had sharper angles. Again, to whom did Betsy Blair provide that description of a 1965 Ford Comet-looking, angular in appearance vehicle? None other than Liggett himself. And that's provided in Liggett's report. Betsy even provided a sketch of the side profile of the car that she observed at the CPS lot, featuring the angles that the car possessed. Blair's sketch of the side profile of the car is attached. Oh, darn, I wish we could see that. We don't have the exhibits. All right. Liggett was fully aware that the car that Betsy Blair described as being backed into a spot at the old CPS building looked nothing like Richard Allen's black Ford Focus, but Liggett concealed that information from Judge Diener. Again, more information concealed. It should also be noted that if Richard Allen left at 1:30 p.m., then the person that Betsy Blair observed on the high bridge at roughly 2 p.m. was not Richard Allen. This would explain why the person that Betsy Blair observed on the high bridge looked nothing like Richard Allen, because it wasn't Richard Allen. It was a 20-year-old kid with brown poofy hair. Concealing Betsy Blair's description of the vehicle at the old CPS building from Judge Diener may have temporarily plugged a hole in the dam of Liggett's problematic timeline when Diener reviewed the affidavit on October 13th, but Liggett's concealment has now been exposed. And it gets even worse. Alrighty. When asked to describe the color of the car that resembles the 1965 Ford Comet, Betsy Blair actually told Liggett that the car she saw was not even black. That's right. That is right. Liggett heard from the mouth of Betsy Blair that the 1965 Ford Comet-looking vehicle, or Mercury vehicle, was not even black, which is the color that Liggett needed the vehicle to be in order to fit the description of Richard's black Ford Focus and described in Liggett's affidavit. So he totally omitted this or whatever because it didn't fit his narrative. Because of Betsy's description of the car she viewed at the old CPS building, evidence supports that Richard Allen left at 1:30, as he told Liggett. So his timeline seems to be supported or corroborated with this, with Betsy Blair's. Sorry, hold on. I'm fixing my laptop here. My dog sinking the tray. So because of Betsy's description of the car she viewed at the old CPS building, evidence supports that Richard Allen left at 1:30. At some point in time after Richard left the old CPS lot, an older, angular-looking car that resembled a 1965 Comet and was not black arrived at the old CPS building. Then the driver of this 1965 Ford Comet-looking angular non-black vehicle backed into the CPS parking lot at roughly 2:15 p.m. When returning home, Betsy Blair observed this car that reminded her of a car that her dad had growing up. All of this adds up to this fact. Evidence concealed by Liggett supports that Richard Allen was not at the crime scene and he had already left at 1:30 p.m. and was already home by the time that Betsy Blair observed the 1965 Ford Comet-looking non-black vehicle at the CPS parking lot. So I guess Richard Allen went straight home from, or that's where he went. He didn't go back to work. He went home. So he was probably having, an earlier day where he got off early afternoon. All right, so Liggett knew all of this. And again, because of Betsy Blair's description of the vehicle that she observed at the old CPS building, evidence supports that Richard Allen was also home by the time that Betsy Blair saw the 20-year-old with brown poofy hair on the bridge, which again explains why the person on the bridge looks nothing like Richard Allen, because it wasn't Richard Allen. So this is simply outrageous and abusive power on part of Liggett. Abusive in that Liggett used his power as a law enforcement officer to conceal evidence to secure a search warrant 26 days before an election in which he was running for sheriff. And that, my friends, is a big deal. So let me read that again. Abusive in that Liggett used his power as a law enforcement officer to conceal evidence to secure a search warrant 26 days before an election in which he was running for sheriff. And at the burnt end of Liggett's abusive behavior is Richard Allen, who has been sitting and suffering in hell for over 10 months at the time of this writing, but he's been there even longer now. Liggett doesn't even have, this was written in September of last year. So Liggett doesn't even have the excuse that Betsy Blair provided the description to a different detective, and therefore he could not have known of Blair's distinguishing description, making it a simple administrative snafu that fell through the cracks. No, Liggett heard the description straight from the mouth of Betsy Blair, yet chose to conceal this timeline-destroying evidence from Judge Diener. If Judge Diener had known that evidence showed that Richard Allen was home at the time that the girls were abducted at 2:15, Diener would not have signed that search warrant. But again, that's not all. It gets even worse. This is the muddy, bloody thing. All right, sorry, I jumped ahead. I've read this before, obviously, but it's been a while. All right, so Liggett flat out lied when he told Judge Diener that in 2017, Sarah Carbow described a man as wearing muddy and bloody clothing and also wearing a blue jacket. For Liggett's timeline to work, not only he, Liggett, needed for Richard Allen's black Ford Focus to be parked at the old CPS lot from 1:30 to 4 p.m., he also needed Sarah Carbow's statement concerning the man that she claims she saw walking westbound at 3:57 to match Betsy Blair's description of a man wearing a blue jacket. It would also help if the man had that on his clothing, the red stuff on his clothing. I don't know if I can say that word. YouTube doesn't like certain words. Anyways, so it would help also if the man had that red DNA on his clothing to further tie him to the Un-Alivings. In his affidavit, Liggett wrote the following. An interview was done of Sarah Carbow in 2017. She states that she was traveling east on 300 North and observed a male subject walking west on the north side of 300 North, away from Monon High Bridge. So that's an error there. She stated that he was wearing a blue colored jacket and blue jeans and was muddy and bloody. So this is straight from Liggett's affidavit. She further stated that it appeared that he had gotten in a fight. Investigators determined from the video that she was on 300 North at 15:57 hours. So 3:57. The blue jacket described by Sarah Carbow would need to match the color of the jacket described by Betsy Blair to help with Liggett's timeline. Again, the red stuff on the clothing would be an added bonus in that it would tie the man that Sarah Carbow observed it would tie him in with the Un-Alivings and therefore assist Judge Diener in making the decision to sign the warrant. So by adding that verbiage, Liggett was making his argument, he was supporting his argument that it could have been this person. You know, he was falsifying evidence or falsifying witness test interview witness statements. He's falsifying. And the problem is that in 2017, Sarah Carbow told Liggett to his face that the man she observed walking west on 300 North was wearing a tan-colored coat, a lighter-colored coat, not a blue jacket. And that comes from Sarah Carbow's June 7th interview with Tony Liggett. She describes that the man she observed was wearing a tan-colored coat, lighter-colored coat, at the 3 o'clock, 5:07 mark. So yeah, what do you guys think of that? She says it was a tan-colored coat. They're saying it was blue. Liggett is saying it was blue, right there. But yet her interview says otherwise. This is why interviews should be, all of them should be recorded, because you cannot trust a written representation from law enforcement of what a witness or a suspect says. You just can't, because they have their own biases, and they will put it towards, they will write the way that they are thinking towards something. Whereas if you have it on camera, you can look at information, you can look at body language, you can look at people's answers if they're hesitant to answer. It's very different to see it for yourself on video than to have a law enforcement officer describe it in his own words, because errors do happen. People can lie in statements as well. So there's that fact. All right, so the problem with that is that he said tan colored jacket. She said tan colored. This is a problem because the color of the man's coat did not match the coat of the 20-year-old boyish looking man with the poofy brown hair that Betsy Blair observed on the High Bridge around 2 p.m. According to Liggett, both of these men were Richard Allen. Another way to put this is that Liggett has asserted that sketch 1 and sketch 2 are the exact same person, meaning Richard Allen, and that's coming from Depot. Remember that Liggett has testified under oath that only one man, Richard Allen, committed these crimes. Therefore, if Betsy Blair observed one man while Sarah Carbow observed an entirely different second man, then this would cut against Liggett's preposterous contention that only one man committed this crime. The fact is that perhaps neither the young men Betsy Blair observed nor the muddy man Sarah Carbow observed had anything to do with the Un-Alivings. Meanwhile, as Blair and Carbow were observing these two different men, Richard Allen was at home, and a 1965 Comet-looking non-black vehicle was parked at the old CPS lot. All right, so Carbow saw a man walking on 300 North wearing a jacket. These are like those Carhartt jackets. They are like that, almost like a burlap material, but not quite. And on the outside, and they're like a lot of workers, people who work outdoors wear them. They're very insulated. People get like overalls in that same material. They're usually like brown, like a weird ugly brown I don't like, but they're usually like brown or tan colored, but you can also get them in this blue. This jacket you can get in blue, which almost looks like a jean color blue. All right, so I forgot where it was. Carbow saw a man walking on 300 North wearing a jacket. Liggett needed the color of that jacket to match the color of the jacket worn by the man Betsy Blair had observed on High Bridge at 2 p.m. because he needed it to be the same man. So the problem was that Carbow did not observe the man walking down 300 North wearing a blue jacket. She observed a tan jacket. This meant that Sarah Carbow and Betsy Blair observed two different men, unless they're going to say like Richard Allen changed his coat or something, which is ridiculous. This created a problem for Liggett's timeline, so instead of being honest, Liggett chose to represent to Diener that Carbow observed a man wearing a blue jacket, when in her 2017 interview, Carbow said it was tan. And we read all that. All right. But that's not all. Nowhere in Sarah Carbow's 2017 interview does Sarah Carbow use the word bloody to describe the clothing that the man was wearing. Nowhere. The so-called muddy bloody lady is actually just the muddy lady, as Carbow only used the word muddy to describe the man that she observed on 300 North. Sorry, I have an itch. In her... It didn't help. All right. Someone's talking about me or thinking about me. All right, so as Carbell only used the word muddy to describe the man she observed in her interview. It certainly would help Judge Diener in making his decision if the man walking down the street was wearing a blue jacket and also wearing bloody clothing, as if he had just ended somebody in the woods, ritualistically with some sticks and stuff. I added that. All right, so however, Liggett just flat out lied. So Sarah Carbell never mentioned a blue coat and never mentioned red DNA in her 2017 interview. Instead of lying, had Liggett told Judge Diener that the man walking down 300 North at 3:57 was wearing a light-colored tan coat instead of a blue coat, then Judge Diener would have realized that Betsy Blair and Sarah Carbell did not see the same man. Instead of lying, had Liggett told Judge Diener that the man walking down 300 North only had on muddy clothing, then Judge Diener would not have associated the man with these crimes. Again, Liggett can't claim that when drafting the affidavit, Liggett relied on the false description provided by a different investigator, because he's the one that was investigating this. He's the one that interviewed all of these people. He's the one that did the main investigation, and everything is getting filtered to him. He's also part of Unified Command, so all of the information from all of law enforcement, it's coming to him. So he can't claim ignorance, is what he's saying. Sarah Carbell told Liggett to his face that the man she observed was wearing a tan coat and was muddy, not bloody. If Judge Diener had been told the truth, he would not have, nor should he have, signed the search warrant. And that, my friends, is where I'm going to leave you. We're almost done. We'll have one more part left. Part 9 will be the last part, because we are now on 117. As you can see, this is a very detailed, well put together document. If you've read through it with me from part 1 to now, there's so much reasonable doubt that it is not Richard Allen. So, and not only is there reasonable doubt, but there appears to be negligence and or corruption on law enforcement's part. And that is seeming apparent, more and more apparent to me as I follow this case, not just this memorandum, but the way that things are being ordered in the court, the way that Judge Gull has a clear bias towards thinking that the defendant is likely guilty. There's even evidence of her liking some post about one of her nieces or somebody who was playing in a softball game for Abby and Libby, like a charity softball game, and she commented on it and said congrats, and I don't know. So something like that, like it shows bias right there. Her family is involved in charitable work for Abby and Libby. So that is a big, to me, I don't know. Plus she commented congrats on it. So it's kind of showing her hand there, her bias there. Anyways, that's where I'm going to leave you for now. We finished through the conclusion of part 2. So, I'm sorry, we've read through the majority of part 3, and we're going to finish with the conclusion, and I think there is a part 4 actually as well. So we still have a little ways to go, but now they're going to tie it all together, I think, in the end, with how it all fits together. So it's going to be interesting. So thank you so much for sticking with me, for reading this with me. I know there's millions of people on the internet that are doing this, and I'm just one of them, but I love doing this stuff. I love talking about it. I love hearing your opinions. Please don't forget to tell me in the comments below what you think about this case, what you think about this memorandum, and don't forget to like and subscribe, and I will see you next time. Thanks so much for watching. Take care.